Re:Zero, Side Story, Red Snowfall on Orcos territory, Part 1.
As far as the eye could see, the land was engulfed by white snow falling from the heavens. Thick clouds of snow obscured the light, and the snowfield was covered in darkness despite it being midday. The snow that had been falling since last night showed no signs of letting up, the delicate ice crystals concealing everything beneath them. There were countless footprints that clung to the snowfield, scattered swords and shields here and there. And also the corpses, bathed in red blood, lacking their hands and legs. The expressions of the corpses were filled with anguish, proof they struggled for life until the end. However, the icy wind that blew over them drowned out their despair, and their lamentations failed to reach anyone's ears, except for one person. Only one person was standing amongst the corpses lying on the snowfield. "Woman, nothing has changed here, has it?" Whispering, there was a black-dressed woman, standing in the middle of the blizzard. Her long, lustrous, braided black hair swayed in the cold wind, and her black eyes, rare to this world, gazed over the field. Those dark, slightly euphoric eyes were drenched in excitement. In her vision lay countless corpses that would never move again. Despite the scene, so horrific that any ordinary person would turn away, the aura of the woman seemed all the more radiant. If every flower had its own most alluring arrangement, then it was in this very scenery, brimming with the aroma of death and blood, that this woman's charm was at its most spectacular. Such was the impression her menacing and mysterious allure evoked, in the midst of the gloomy, drifting, thick snow. Rushing to the battlefield late was a group of fully armed men, gasping and speechless at the sight before them. The warriors, clad in fur armor and helmets, armed with swords and axes, were thoroughly petrified at the sight of the woman standing alive on the blood-stained snowfield. "Woman, oh, my!" The woman slowly turned to the speechless men. She slackened her scarlet lips and graciously raised her hand towards the men. In the woman's hand was a curved knife responsible for the countless corpses. "Woman, I apologize. I couldn't wait, so I went ahead and took care of them." With a flirtatious smirk, the woman delivered an apology to the men, clearly only as a mere formality. However, not a single man raised his voice in response to her apology in protest about her stealing their work. The Holy Kingdom of Gusteko was known for having the harshest natural environment out of the 4 major countries: white snow that never stopped falling, and never melting permafrost. In this world of extreme cold, where growing crops and raising livestock were fatally unsuitable occupations, there was an endless series of challenges to survive through every day. Rooted in that harsh environment, the doctrine of the Holy Church of Gusteko was born. According to the doctrine, the frozen earth and the cold wind were all trials given to the people by a greater being. The only way to give peace to one's soul in the afterlife was to endure those trials. It was hard for those born in wealthy countries to comprehend, but the doctrine had spread throughout Gusteko, and most people didn't doubt its teachings. The streets were saturated with people who wanted salvation, and all were desperate to cling to a hopeless dream. This was the reality of the Holy Kingdom of Gusteko, and its cold history that had continued for hundreds of years. Red-faced man, and so, those guys got completely rooted. Because of that, they said we could take as much as we wanted from the buffet. The man, clearly intoxicated, spat and slammed his glass down on the counter. He was a huge, ruddy man with a crooked nose reddened by drunkenness. Although his vulgar gesture splashed alcohol, he received no admonishment. Rather, the man's shouts were accompanied by cheers, and the surrounding drunks began to clink their glasses together in unison. At the moment, the inside of the bar was occupied by a group of men drinking heavily. The men were in a good mood and paid well, and there were no other customers to be disturbed. And so, the now lawless bar's owner said nothing to the group. "Red-faced man, oh, the joy of labor. The water of life. We give thanks to the Holy King and the merciful Mother of the Holy Church of Gusteko that we have survived to this day. Cheers, mercenaries, cheers." The empty glasses were filled, and the others raised their glasses in response to the toast given by the red-faced man. He was clearly mocking the teachings of the Holy Church, but none here would accuse him of that. The doctrines of the Holy Church were known to all of Gusteko, and these men were no exception. However, whether or not they actually followed the teachings was a different story. The doctrine didn't fill your stomach, and it didn't save your life, at least, that was the way they saw it. The owner of the bar, the only outsider, was reluctant to face the men. As a man 50 years old, who had been running a tavern in this country until his age, Gusteco's teachings had been familiar to him since he was born. Of course, he was well aware that there was no salvation in the world like the doctrine described, but it still felt unpleasant for the teachings to be ridiculed. Of course, he wasn't experienced enough in customer service to be able to say that to a mercenary corp full of brutes. Red-faced man, even so, they were attacked to such an extent. The lot at Orcos' domain must be looking pale right about now. Oh, suddenly, the expression on the red face that had been in good spirits and smelled of alcohol shifted. A bell had sounded at the entrance of the tavern, announcing the arrival of a new customer. Tonight, the tavern was reserved for the men, and not a single person in the village was unaware of that. So who was the uninvited guest? Red-faced man, Fuit. The red-faced man whistled as a figure leisurely crossed the bar and headed for the counter. The reaction of the people around him was more or less the same, the drunken gazes welcoming the newcomer with an ulterior motive. Of course, it was a woman with beauty that would set any man's lust ablaze. Woman, some milk, please. Sitting at the counter, the woman placed her order, and for a moment the shopkeeper admired her appearance. She had dark, slightly droopy black eyes, and long, glossy black hair that wasn't something one saw often around the Gustecan town. Her red lips had been moistened with her tongue, and a thin nightgown wrapped around her entire body. The woman raised a shapely eyebrow at the quiet owner, propped one elbow on the counter, and repeated, "Woman, milk, that's what I'm ordering." Shopkeeper, oh, yeah. Right, I'm sorry. The shopkeeper shook his head lightly at the affirmed order before reaching for the milk. In the frigid cold of Gusteco, milk was a precious commodity, far more valuable than alcohol. Even if he disregarded that, it was rare for a customer to order milk instead of alcohol in a bar. Naturally, the order could easily be used to start a quarrel or conversation. Red-faced man, hey, you can't come to a bar and order milk, can you? Sitting next to the woman without asking, the red-faced giant took advantage of the opportunity. The man placed the empty glass on the counter and held up 2 fingers to the owner. Red-faced man, drinks. One for me and one for my sister here. Woman, you'll buy me a drink? Red-faced man, oh, yeah. We can buy a whole keg and still have change with the money we made today. I'll let you get as drunk as you want, okay? In response to the woman's flirtatious glance, the red face smacked his chest and replied with authority. The shop owner glanced at the listening woman, whose face broke into a thin smile, nodding at the giant's offer. The shopkeeper, relieved to see the situation hadn't turned violent, presented a glass of alcohol to both of them. Accepting the glasses, the woman and the red-faced man bumped them together in a toast. Red-faced man, to the Holy King and the Merciful Mother. Woman, oh, that's unexpected. You're a follower of the Holy Church of Gusteco? Red-faced man, well, I'm not a sincere believer. I was baptized when I was a kid, but now, I'm in this line of work. I've long since lost my appreciation for the doctrine, and my right to cling to the pity of the Merciful Mother, too. Woman, indeed. I know how you feel. I'm from this country, after all. She expressed her agreement with the red face while sipping her drink. Regardless of the chilling emotion in her voice, the red-faced man's eyes were glued to the woman's beautiful profile. The man's throat gulped in slight arousal at even the way she seductively swallowed her liquor. Red-faced man, what brings you to this bar? Didn't you know we had the whole place to ourselves today? Woman, does that mean I have to leave? Red-faced man, no, it's the other way around. I'm all for having a nice lady like you around, but even the villagers are avoiding the stores tonight. What are you doing here on such a day? Woman, Igor Kenash. Interrupting the man's words, the woman said just one phrase. When the red-faced giant rolled his eyes at the name, the woman narrowed her black eyes and licked her lips. Woman, I'm here on his orders. Do you know Baron Kenash? Red-faced man, you might know this, but it's Baron Kenash who's footing the bill for our drinks today. I see. That husband of yours is very kind. Woman, oh, dear, The giant man's ruddy face broke into a broad smile as he roughly hugged the woman's thin shoulders. The woman's small surprise at the behavior brought a booze-soaked grin to the man's face. Red-faced man, it was very generous of him, not only in paying for the drinks, but also to include such an excellent woman. The Baron truly knows how to deal with people like us. There had only been scrawny girls in the village to satisfy the lust of the mercenaries. The only town with a decent brothel was distant, and the woman in front of them was the perfect reward for the men who had deceived their desires with alcohol thus far. The man, deeply moved by his employer's consideration, was about to put his hands on his gift when, unknown, Logris. Is there a Logris Hyatt? Red-faced man, Suddenly, someone rushed into the tavern. The men in the tavern looked back sullenly at the call that followed. Among them, the one most irritated was the red-faced Logris, the very one called by name. Having his fun interrupted, Logris glared at the newcomer with scowling eyes. Logris, so you're the Baron's errand boy, huh? What do you want? Igor's subordinate, Master Igor wants to see you. The leader of the Crimson Hunting Squad must come to the residence immediately. Logris, immediately. Right now? Igor's subordinate, what other interpretation is there? In response to the younger man's sarcasm, Logris rubbed his crooked nose in visible annoyance. It was a call from his employer. He couldn't say that he wouldn't comply, but, Logris, if he merely turned his head, he would find a beautiful woman with an alluring aura right beside him. If he left this place, he would have to leave his reward behind. And, he would have to give it to his subordinates around him. Logris, tomorrow isn't good enough? Igor's subordinate, Master Igor says it's urgent. You'll have to comply with his request, Butcher. Logris sighed at the still inflexible reply. He couldn't give priority to his desires in the present and lose his source of food for tomorrow, and beyond. It wasn't possible to survive in the holy kingdom of Gusteko with such a careless attitude. Logris, sorry, sis. I've been summoned by the boss. It would be a shame to leave a beauty like you here. Woman, it's all right. But don't worry, you're not the only one who's getting called out. Logris, oh? As Logris racked his brain in confusion, the woman who was still in his arms asked, right? To the young errand man. His expression instantly stiffened at the question. The young man, who had been unconcerned even when surrounded by rogues, had begun to sweat on his forehead. Igor's subordinate, yes. Master Igor has called for you. Can you please come, too? Woman, yes, of course. So I hope you won't be too frightened. Igor's subordinate, I'm not frightened. Woman, I'm sensitive to smell. Those frightened have a frightened scent, and those angered smell of anger. You know? The young messenger was dumbstruck at the rejection of his immediate rebuttal. The woman licked her lips and looked over at Logris. Woman, we've both been called to the same person, can you escort me there? Logris, that's fine, but... Sister, what's your name? Unwrapping his arm from around her shoulders, Logris kept an eye on the woman's movements. The woman's grin deepened at the soldier's drunken gaze, now weakening in intoxication, her smile deepening to the utmost amount, and with an arousing allure that seemed to hang in the air, she gave him her name. Woman, I'm Elsa. Elsa Granhire, mercenaries. At the mention of her name, a hush spread through the tavern at once. The drunk but battle-hardened mercenaries all fell speechless and exchanged glances. Logris covered his face with his palm, marveling at the absurd significance of just one simple name. Logris, oh, shit. I thought you were just a nice lady, but you're the Bowel Hunter. The best proof of her infamy was the fact that his voice was fully devoid of lust. Man, you sure took your time, didn't you? I was beginning to worry that you might not come. Logris, well, I'm sorry about that. Man, you'll have to be careful next time. I do not have a very big heart. At the greeting he received as soon as he entered the room, Logris scratched his head in helplessness. Unaware of the subtle sarcasm in Logris's reply, the man nodded magnanimously and welcomed him and Elsa into the room. In an ornate room with a long, woolly carpet, facing Elsa and her companion across an unnecessarily expensive desk was Baron Igor Kenash, the man who had called them here. The hair on his head was thinning, and his face was greasy and glistening. With a belly flab from alcohol and luxury, and a dialect that grated the nerves, Igor was not a person to be liked. No matter how many times they came in contact with him, that impression would not fade, but instead only grow stronger. However, that was just a generalization. Elsa didn't care very much, but, Igor, oh, Elsa. My subordinates report that your work was truly magnificent. Beautiful and skillful. What a wonderful woman. Just as I had hoped, Elsa, thank you for the compliment. I, too, enjoyed the work, Igor, So, what do you think? Have you made up your mind to become my property yet? Igor's eyes practically licked her, the Baron not even bothering to hide his lecherous stare and ulterior motives. She was dressed in a black evening gown, and although the amount of skin exposed was minimal, the way the cloth revealed the lines of her body made men's imaginations run wild. Igor, too, was captivated by her sensuality. However, Elsa shook her head at Igor's emotionless pickup line. Elsa, I'm sorry, but I have to decline. I don't find men with unhealthy lifestyles attractive. Igor, how honest you are. You're the only one who's ever turned down my advances so firmly. Igor laughed in amusement at Elsa's dauntless reply. It wasn't an easy task to go against the will of the Baron, the most powerful man in the area. In the Holy Kingdom of Gusteko, the disparity in status was absolute. It was a reality that cannot be overcome. Logros, so, the Baron is free to make passes on the lady. What can I do for you, Igor? You're very direct, aren't you? Logros, well, I'm not so handsome that someone would want to spend time with me outside of business. Also, if I return too late, the fools will empty out all the expensive liquor. Which is quite worrisome. Although Logros had contemplated Elsa's boldness, he himself was also quite direct in his remarks. Igor laughed at their attitudes and ran his hand through his head of scanty hair. His lustful face changed into something more ugly, as his eyes began to harbor a cruel tint. Igor, you two have done well so far. I'd like to reward you for your achievements and make you my full-fledged protégés. On top of that, I want you to begin an operation to purify the Orcos domain. Logros, purifying Orcos domain, huh? Igor, yes, purification. Our neighboring domain ruled by Victor Orcos has now become a breeding ground for abhorrent human trafficking. His Highness will be terribly distressed by this fact. We must bury this incident in the snow as soon as possible, secretly. With clenched fists, Igor authoritatively explained the sordid affairs of the Orcos domain, which was right next to the Kenash domain he ruled. Victor Orcos, the Baron of Orcos domain, was suspected of complicity in the human trafficking of his own people, who were secretly captured and sold as slaves to other countries. Naturally, Victor was asked to give an explanation by the Holy Church of Gusteko, which ran the Holy Kingdom. However, he refused the request and prepared to fight a full-scale war with the private army he had gathered in his domain. Igor, this is nothing but a betrayal of the Holy Church and proof that the Baron has committed treason. We must get the situation under control as soon as possible. Logros, a church with the power to appoint barons in various regions, can't afford to lose its influence with its followers. If the Holy Church's power is weakened, the effects on the other countries will be immeasurable. At the Baron's explanation, Logros pointed out an issue. Igor, with his flabby face, drew his chin back at the mercenary's point and added, "That's not all. Igor, if the merciful mother from the Holy Church, the spirit beast Oddglass, finds out about such a thing, the country will be destroyed." Igor's quivering voice was filled with a mixture of uncontrollable fear and awe. It was fear and reverence for Oddglass, the spirit beast who was considered the mother of the country. Oddglass was a great spirit with outstanding power even among spirits, and counted within the 4 great spirits. Normally, spirits didn't interfere with the way of the world, but Oddglass was an exception among them, and she continued to take a friendly position toward humans. The Great Spirit called all the lives in the harsh land of Gusteko as her own children, yet spared little mercy for them. The simple fact that humans were able to live in Gusteko, which was covered by permafrost, was primarily due to the help of the myriad of spirits and micro-spirits under the control of Oddglass. Due to this, Oddglass and the Holy Kingdom of Gusteko had a long and profound friendship. The authority to decide the head of the Holy Kingdom and the Holy Church, the Holy King, had been delegated to Oddglass, and this tradition had been passed down from the beginning of the history of the Holy Kingdom of Gusteko. That format was unbreakable. Oddglass had always been, and would always be, the merciful mother of the Holy Church. With the Holy King as their puppet, the Church would continue to rule the country. Igor, we must prevent the collapse of tradition. This is the mission that we have been tasked with at this time. Logros, I've roughly grasped the situation. If it's so urgent, wouldn't it be better to mobilize the Holy Church's acolyte knights? Honestly, it would be a great help if you simply don't assign the work to us. From the standpoint of a hired hand, Logros scratched his bulbous nose and made a proposal. The acolyte knights that Logros mentioned were the holy warriors of the Holy Church of Gusteko. It was rumored both in and out of the country that they were a select group of elites who had received the blessing of the Holy King and wielded superhuman strength. Some said they rivaled the 9 divine generals of the Wallachia Empire. If the rumors were true, the power of the acolyte knights should easily seize Orcos' domain. Igor, unfortunately, we need the approval of His Highness to move the acolyte knights. If His Highness finds about this incident, it's only a matter of time before the spirit beast finds out. Elsa, oh. Won't the Holy King be heartbroken by the scandals in Orcos' domain, too? Elsa, who had been silent so far, asked a question to which Igor crossed his short, stocky arms. Igor, of course, His Highness will be troubled if he learns of this incident. We have to take the initiative to solve the problem before that happens. As long as the problem is solved, there's no need to go to the trouble of reporting something that will only cloud His Highness's mind. Do you understand? Elsa, you guys will have to work hard too to keep your warm beds and meals. Igor appeared slightly apprehensive at Elsa's unfocused thoughts. However, the Baron quickly straightened his grimy face and ordered both Elsa and Logros once again. Igor, from tomorrow onwards, you will be the key players in the purification operation. My soldiers are lacking in experience on the battlefield, but they are more experienced in military tactics. Let's see what the Butcher and the Bowel Hunter are capable of. Logros, this is the first time I've ever had someone expect me to use my head as well as my strength. Well, I'll be the Baron's faithful hands and feet as long as the money is paid. Please use me as you see fit. Elsa, I feel the same as the one on my right, although I'm not really that interested in compensation. Following the mercenary-like remark of Logros, Elsa moistened her lips and smiled. Taking the positive reactions of the two mercenaries as an affirmation, Igor nodded and reached his hand to his flabby chin. Igor, so, let's bury Victor Orcos' sins in the snow, and cleanse him away. Contrary to his terribly lazy appearance, his eyes gave off the impression that he was both shrewd and sharp. The next day, the full-scale purification operation of Orcos' domain was put into action. Baron Igor Kenash's plan for the purification operation was very simple. Igor's private army, led by the Crimson Hunting Squad, spearheaded by the Butcher Logros Hyatt, would attack the garrison of Orcos' domain one after another. As a diversion, the Bowel Hunter, a lone force, would infiltrate the enemy territory, assassinate commanders and reserve troops, and defeat them one by one. Once the chain of command was broken, all that was left was for the Crimson Hunting Squad to wear down the guards. It was a simple strategy, but the results were plain to see. Due to both the strength of the Crimson Hunting Squad, and the skill of Igor, who properly utilized Elsa, an assassination specialist, Logros, surprisingly, our employer has quite astute judgment. Logros muttered to himself as he hid behind a shield, escaping the rain of arrows falling on him. The temperature was low, and he could see his white breath as he exhaled. He felt his body temperature climbing and steam rising up from his neck and forehead. Hearing Logros's murmurs, his subordinates, who were also hiding, turned to look at him. Waving his hand lightly at their gaze, Logros picked up some snow and smeared it on his face. Logros, so far, we've won many battles in a row, and to top it off, we've lost hardly any of our allies. In fact, the only losses have been coming from hired hands like us. Considering that his forces haven't really reduced in number shows the wealth he gained by sucking the sweet juice out of the church. It was beyond Elsa's expectations, too. Mercenary, that lady? It's a shame that such a beautiful woman is so crazy. Logros, She would be great if she weren't so crazy. Her fetishes are completely perverse, mercenary fetishes. Not in an erotic way. Logros's face contorted into a wry smile at his subordinate's absurd question. He raised his hatchet and used its tip to indicate the target of the attack, the fort defended by the garrison. His men followed his gesture with their eyes, tilting their heads. And the next moment, mercenary, oh, geez, Logros, see that? If you can honestly see that woman erotically even now, you have my respect. Logros' lips curved at the reaction of his subordinates, whose eyes had widened and faces had paled. They all looked up at the upper level of the fort, where they witnessed countless flowers of blood bloom, and the dark figure of a woman running through the blooming field of scarlet flowers, a deranged grin on her face, energizing, enchanting, endearing, exhilarating, exciting. Elsa, my, how wonderful, what a thrill. She spun her precious knife in her palm and mercilessly slammed it into the figure standing in her way. Elsa's beloved blade was bent in the reverse direction from the original shape of the knife. That ensured just the right amount of weight was placed at the very edge of the special blade, and enabled the power to cut anything apart with a single blow. Indeed, the blade struck the guard's helmet, ripping into his skull through the headgear. Grey matter spilled out of his brain, and the blank-eyed guard, on the verge of collapsing, swung the great sword in his hand. Elsa, incredible. So irresistible. Elsa marveled at his will to fight, even with half of his head cut off. The man unleashed a two-handed strike with his blade powerful enough to cut through a large frozen tree. To deal with the blow, Elsa cleaved off the attacker's wrist. Guard. The guard spoke no words in his last moments. She slammed a kick into his chest, blowing him away with approval. More enemies still appeared from the corner of the corridor, stifling their furious, screaming hearts at the sight of their companions' corpses. There were already more than a dozen bodies piled up in the passage beneath Elsa's feet. All of them were warriors who had confronted Elsa and fallen prey to her savagery, respecting their mortal struggle, admiring the new advancing opponents. Then, ripping their bellies open, Elsa, ha, ha 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 ha. Elsa retaliated to the precious lives striving to resist with the utmost level of affection. She put her adoration into the end of her blade and her feelings into each strike. And her heart was moved to tears by all the life pouring out, in blood, in flesh, in bone, in life, in bowels. This moment was all that Elsa wanted. Elsa, it's here. She kicked open the iron door at the upper layer of the stronghold, at the back end of the passage, and burst into the room. Elsa, carrying a blood-stained knife, was greeted calmly by the master of the room, an old soldier. The elderly warrior was clad in aged armor and held a steel mace in his hand. His surging, powerful fighting spirit was plain to see. It was visible in his body. This old soldier was the very best of all the guards in the fortress. Old soldier, I didn't expect to be facing a woman. Elsa, oh, you don't like female opponents? I'd be disappointed if that diminished your determination. Old soldier, that's a useless concern. No matter who I'm dealing with, I'll not show mercy to my enemies. Elsa tilted her head as she asked her question, and the old warrior's words brimmed with his entire, evident fighting spirit. The sensation warmed her skin, and Elsa leaned forward, shivering. Elsa, I'm the Bowel Hunter, Elsa Granhire. Old soldier, there is no name to call a villain. I will conquer you, demon. At the refusal to impart his name, Elsa smiled thinly at the old soldier, who closed their distance in a single bound. His weapon, a massive lump of steel, was swung from above his armor and flashed downwards with speed and power that was unbelievable for an older man. The blow shattered and pierced through the floor of the stone fort. It was a strike so powerful that the entire fort seemed to shake from the impact. A cloud of smoke billowed into the room, and when the smoke cleared, Elsa, I knew it. Elsa's loud footsteps rang as she used a powerful swing to clear the smoke screen, peering down at the floor. The aged soldier had been hit by Elsa's blow and fallen, his limbs splayed out. At the view of the dying old soldier, Elsa's eyes quivered, entranced, as she let out a hot, intense sigh. Elsa, considering your intestines have an exceptionally lovely color. Such was the end of the battle that determined the fall of the fort that day. The visitor who stepped into the room stiffened, his face showing surprise at the sight. A huge, red-faced man, his eyes had widened and cheeks tightened. Elsa tilted her head curiously at his reaction. Elsa, what's wrong? Logros, what's wrong with? Well, what are you doing? Elsa, can't you see? Logros pointed with his thick fingers, and Elsa held it up for him to see. But the giant man's confusion redoubled, and Elsa frowned with her shapely eyebrows. Elsa, I'm knitting yarn, and we're in a cold country. This should be nothing unusual, I believe. Logros, knitting itself isn't unusual, but the one who was knitting was surprising. To think that even a woman like you knits. Elsa, oh my, how heartless. Regardless of your doubts, I'm pretty confident in my knitting skills. With that, Elsa spread out her knitting project in plain sight and showed it to Logros. It was an unfinished doll, just beginning to look vaguely complete. The design looked like it was for a child, and the cuteness and delicate construction of the doll demonstrated a great deal of skill even to the untrained eye. To be honest, it didn't overlap with his impression of its creator, Elsa. Logros, I never imagined that doll making was your hobby. How long have you been doing it? Elsa, since last night, if the question is when I started making this doll. If it's about doll making itself, then it's been over a decade. Logros, The replies are a surprise for both questions. Scratching his nose at Elsa's answer, Logros chose a bunk to sit on. The room assigned to Elsa was one of the rooms in the fort they had just conquered that day. The owner of the room seemed to be a man who didn't like extravagance. Elsa was also a carefree and self-assured person, so she would likely get along with the owner of the room. Elsa probably killed that person herself, though. Elsa, without any particular sentimentality, Elsa silently moved her hands and continued to work on making the woolen doll. Woven dolls didn't really require any difficult tools or thinking. She used a crochet hook to make the head, body, limbs, and other parts, and finally joined them together to create a single form. Elsa's favorite part of the process was filling the woven parts with cotton. Elsa, when I put cotton inside the doll like this, I feel kinda fulfilled. Logros, oh, I see. That does sound like a hobby of a bowl hunter. Elsa, I'll take that as a compliment. Instead of her handicraft skills, somehow her motives were being praised. She found it hard to understand. In any case, Logros watched with an incomprehensible look on his face as the doll was magically completed in Elsa's hands. Although she was skeptical of his behavior, Elsa didn't say anything about it. It was the other party who had come all the way to visit her. If he wanted to talk, he would do it on his own. Logros, for a while, the only noise in the room came from the sound of Elsa silently working on her doll, and just when the doll was almost finished, Logros, Elsa, don't you think this purification operation smells fishy? Elsa, fishy? Logros, it's just my intuition, but I don't like the way the situation meshes together. I was just wondering if you also had smelled something off around you. Finally, Logros began to explain the reason for his visit. At his question, Elsa paused and recrossed her legs in her chair, thinking, the purification operation. Regardless of the merits of the name, the plan itself had been executed flawlessly so far. The garrisons in the various regions of Orcos' domain, which were the objective of the operation, had been conquered one after another, and the inner citadel was just before their eyes. Elsa herself was satisfied that she had fulfilled most of the objectives that Igor had hired her for. Elsa, we should be happy that the operation is going well, right? The damage is minimal and the winning streak continues. Isn't that what you want, too? Logros, if it weren't for the fact that my employer has some sort of ulterior motive, I could get drunk in a bar every night if I wanted to. I can tell that the Baron is a really shady fellow. Well, that's how it's always been with the Gusteco Church. Elsa, when we first met, you were angry with the Holy Church. At Logros's abject response, Elsa recalled the first time she met him at the tavern. She had a faint memory of the conversation she had with him when present at the Crimson Hunting Squad's rented bar, before the purification operation to overcome the hostile forces began. Elsa, yes, that must have been you. Though I don't remember much. Logros, you say that with a lot of confidence for someone who has a bad memory. Elsa, I may not remember events very well, but I'm confident in my ability to remember smells. I can recall the smell of your anger. Do you have bad memories of the Gusteco Holy Church? Logros, it's not interesting to listen to my personal story, and you're not interested in it in the first place. You don't want to talk about your old life too much, do you? Logros sniffed unhappily and glared at Elsa, as if she had hit a sore spot. At the look in his eyes, she touched her black hair and twisted her fingers in the braid. Elsa, I was originally sold by my parents as a slave. Logros, Elsa, see, black hair and black eyes are rare, aren't they? I think my parents didn't have my colors, but I found out much later that it was due to an old bloodline. Logros was taken aback as Elsa began to talk about her past with indifference. As he watched in astonishment, Elsa continued to speak. What came back to her mind were the chilling memories of being sold by her parents and thrown out into the cold world. Elsa, but I escaped with the other children before the Slavers could turn me into a true commodity. If I had failed, I'd probably be in a whorehouse by now, or long dead. Compared to the girls who were caught on the way to escape or the ones who fell off the cliff and died, I guess I was lucky. If one was caught by Slavers, they would be forced into a terrible environment and made an example of by other slaves. If isolated in a blizzard, they would die a slow death, their limbs rotting away from frostbite. Others would have been attacked by the beasts of the snowy fields and eaten alive. She knew that she was lucky that she didn't suffer any of those consequences and lasted as long as she did. Elsa, the rest of the time, as a random orphan, I got into all sorts of wrong things. In the process, I learned how to use a blade, and here I am. I guess that's about it. She had omitted a lot on the way, but it was a frivolous time in which she couldn't find anything to talk about. In any case, that was the end of Elsa's personal story. Looking back, she could honestly say that her life's history was so empty that she could tell all of its contents in a short time. Contrary to Elsa's dull feelings, Logros looked uneasy. He scratched his nose, his coarse-looking face reddened, muttering and trying to choose a word. Logros, why are you talking to me about that? Elsa, Logros, if you look at me with that expression, I'm going to think I'm weird. Elsa, I won't tell you something I don't want to tell you. I didn't hide it because it wasn't something to hide. That's all you're asking? Logros, your values are too strange. I'm realizing that the hard way. Sighing in resignation, Logros propped himself up on one elbow on his knee, turning his gaze away from Elsa. Logros, my family used to be in a good position in the church. We had a lot of money when I was a kid. But when I was 15, my parents lost a power struggle, and we fell into ruin. Their property was confiscated, my father was executed, and my mother was taken away by a religious cult. So, as a 15-year-old kid, I was thrown out into the snow alone, scrambled to get by, and now I'm a respectable drunk. Rubbing his red face, Logros wore a thin smile and spoke with an alcohol-induced hoarse, raspy voice. At his words, Elsa closed one eye, fiddling with the doll in her hand. Elsa, see, it's not like that's the kind of life to frantically hide, right, Logros? That's not it. The issue is that it's a boring story that would put its listeners to sleep. Now, although it's the kind of personal story where even I would doze off telling it, it does have a purpose. It's simply that the fishy smell reminds me a lot of that tragic life experience. Elsa, the power struggle in the holy order that your father lost? Logros, there isn't a single Gustecan citizen with power who isn't involved in the affairs of the Holy Church of Gusteco. Our employer, the Baron, and his opponent, Victor Orcos, definitely have something in common. And it's undoubtedly a big deal. In a somewhat condescending manner, Logros urged Elsa to be cautious. Rising from his bunk, the giant man continued in a slightly hushed voice. Logros, if Victor Orcos is as bad as his reputation says he is, treating his people like slaves and selling them off, then the high morale of the Orcos domain's garrison doesn't add up. Elsa, Logros, why would they risk their lives to the last soldier to fight for a prick? There's no way. Victor's private army continued to resist to this point, and Logros remarked upon the motive for their strenuous struggle. His words also reminded Elsa of the old commander she had killed half a day ago. That will and attitude certainly couldn't have been half-hearted, but, Elsa, to be honest, I don't really think I care. Logros, That's your conclusion after all this talk, Elsa? I'm not good at thinking. I like to do things the way I feel. Like this. Elsa showed the exhausted Logris the woolen doll she had completed during the conversation. She pinched the limbs of the human-shaped yarn doll and shook its soft body from side to side. Elsa, it's quite well done for amusing oneself, isn't it? Logris, yes. Well done. I don't know if I can make anything like that, Elsa. The only thing you need to carry around is a crochet hook and yarn. I've already made more than a dozen of these during this mission. After seeing good bowel remains in particular, I make a lot of progress. Logris, I didn't ask. As Elsa's cheeks flushed with excitement, Logris felt more of a wall of incomprehension than a man's lust for her. With that, he waved his hand, compressed his huge frame, and headed for the exit of the room. Logris, it doesn't mean much, but put what I said in the corner of your mind. Use your intuition. Elsa, what were you talking about just now? Logris, hey. Elsa, I'm kidding. Seeing Logris's panic at the elusive response, Elsa put her hand over her mouth, wearing a slight smile. Shrugging his shoulders at the smirk, the giant man turned to leave the room this time, and just before he went through the door, he suddenly looked back at the room and, Logris, well, even though you made 10 dolls, you didn't put any in the room. She looked at the doll held to her chest and tilted her head at the fact that its siblings weren't in the room. Thinking about Logris' words, Elsa narrowed her dark eyes. She spoke after she licked her red lips. Elsa, in that case, I guess I won't tell you where the dolls are. And, in a bewitching and mischievous manner, she brushed off Logris' question and sent him away. Regardless of Logris' suspicions, the purification operation continued without a hitch. With the fall of the fort due to the efforts of the Bowel Hunter and the Crimson Hunting Squad, the war situation in Orcos' domain quickly turned in favor of Baron Igor Kenash. Even disregarding Elsa and Logris, the Baron's private army also won a number of victories on other fronts, boosting the morale of the entire Igor camp. Igor's subordinate, I didn't know that war could be so bloody. Haha, I can see why history is full of battles. These were the words of the young man who was in command of the private army in place of Igor, the Baron's protégé, and who came to call Elsa and Logris at the tavern before. Igor seemed to value him, and all the instructions of the Baron who remained in his mansion were conveyed through him. Elsa and the Crimson Hunting Squad also operated with the Baron through him. Logris, consecutive victories in a row, that's certainly good news. Although carelessness should be avoided. Elsa, a midway victory is like drinking sake in front of the enemy. That's the quote from Hoshin, isn't it? Logris and Elsa both dismissed the feelings of the young man, who was ecstatic over his side's victories and expected them to feel the same. Elsa aside, Logris was probably just trying to offer friendly advice. The young man, however, was very unhappy with their opinion. Igor's subordinate, I know that without being told. However, the morale of the allies is high, and even though the situation is favorable, you're being timid, Butcher. Logris, we've proceeded with the war like a slaughterhouse, carefully chopping off the heads of the enemies like their livestock. That's why they call us pig killers. Since there's no way that my approach can be called cowardice or weakness, I can't say that either I or my Crimson Hunting Squad is weak. The young man blushed as he was belittled for getting carried away with the incomplete victory. It was difficult to leave the argument like that due to his frustration, and he wouldn't have been able to back down if he didn't let it go. In the end, there was no stopping the excitement of the young man overcome by his belief in their victory. Igor's subordinate, as per Igor Summer's instructions, will push up the battle line. After the garrison retreats, leave it to us to deal with the soldiers. The Crimson Hunting Squad and Bowel Hunter are ordered to attack. Logris, we've been drawing the short straw lately, haven't we? Elsa, really? I've been enjoying it in my own way. The corners of Elsa's lips lifted at Logris' grumbles about the impending torment of marching through the middle of a blizzard. At the elated young man's command, Elsa and the Crimson Hunting Squad had commenced moving their forces to raid a defensive encampment of Orcos' domain. An opportunity to bring it down at this time period had opened up. It was normally a well-lit time of day, but the blizzard and thick clouds had made the environment so dim it was as if it was midnight. Elsa, it just occurred to me, the snowfall was so heavy that the footprints they had made would soon disappear. Elsa, the only one moving smoothly, tilted her head as the others struggled along the knee-deep snow-covered path. Elsa, you guys are called the Crimson Hunting Squad, but you wear white furs for work? As Elsa voiced her question, she had noticed the group of people stirring in her vision all clad in white fur. It was the fur of the white wolf that inhabited the northern part of Gusteko. Despite its beautiful white appearance, the fur was extremely tough and had high insulation properties. It truly was equipment for working in the snow. Logris bristled when she pointed out the inconsistency between the beautiful fur and the name of the mercenary group. Logris, I'm just bluffing, you know. If you call yourself the Crimson Hunting Squad, everyone will assume that you're the ones in red. We profit if even one person falls for it. Elsa, I see, you're quite underhanded. Logris, at least make it sound like I'm wickedly cunning or something. I mean, don't I have the aura of the butcher? Elsa, indeed. By the way, does anyone know why I'm nicknamed the Bowel Hunter? Logris, the scariest part is that you seem like you're serious about that name. He interpreted her serious riddle as a quip, and she wound up unsuccessful in her goal of distraction. The members of the Crimson Hunting Squad still seemed to have regained a bit of their composure, though, and Elsa fiddled with her braids at their reaction. Before long, a building came into view at the end of their vision, clouded by the snowstorm. It was probably the defensive position they were aiming for, and their presence had likely become visible from the other side. Elsa, the procedure will be the same as before. Logris, flashy diversion, and Elsa will sneak in. All right. Don't mess up. The exchange before the offensive was brief. Elsa would go behind the building, and the Crimson Hunting Squad would draw the enemy's attention to the front. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 1, Elsa-san, be careful. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 2, don't get too bloody. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 3, I'll see you in my dreams. Logris's men also called out to Elsa as she set out alone on her dangerous journey. Having fought together more than 10 times, there was no doubt in their minds about Elsa's abilities. Elsa also had a certain amount of trust in the fighting style of the Crimson Hunting Squad. Elsa, I can't tell them apart, though. Muttering inaudibly, Elsa left the group and went off on her own. Leaving no tracks on the snowy path, Elsa looked up at the approaching buildings. The building concealed within the blizzard was completely visible from the outside by the illumination of a crystal lamp. This level of carelessness was extremely rare. Considering their looming defeat, they were awfully easygoing. Elsa, was it possible that the enemy was lacking in intelligence and had a poor understanding of the situation? As soon as she began to have doubts, she heard the faint sound of battle from the direction where she left the Crimson Hunting Squad. It was the signal the guards of the stronghold and Logris had begun battle. Elsa's role was to use the battle as a cover to infiltrate the building and take down the key parts of the enemy. However, Elsa, oh my, while Elsa scaled the back wall and searched for a passage to sneak in through, the rear entrance of the building opened and a dragon carriage rushed out right beneath her eyes. A white dragon with a white canopy to disappear into the snow, just like the equipment of the Crimson Hunting Squad. The dragon carriage's speed didn't let up, instead accelerating to full speed away from the battlefield. Elsa, Igor's forces weren't particularly deployed in the direction of the dragon carriage's escape. Logris, clashing with the enemy in front, wouldn't be able to notice the carriage's existence. If Elsa missed it, the dragon carriage would be able to escape without any hindrances. The question was whether or not the dragon carriage was worth postponing the capture of the enemy territory. Elsa, well, I can think about it after I catch it. Even if gaining control of the battlefront was delayed a bit, Logris and the others would be able to hold out. Elsa chose to follow her intuition rather than thinking. And her intuition ordered her to chase the dragon carriage. Elsa, normally, it would be nearly impossible for humans to catch up with a fleeing earth dragon on their own. The dragon pulling the fleeing carriage was of the Iris species, which among ground dragons were the most suited for cold climates. They had scales the same color as their white fur, and they raced across the snow with their huge bodies, driving their claws into the snow in order to anchor themselves. Humans who would get their feet stuck in the snow could never catch up. Elsa, despite rushing and running through the snow, was no exception. Therefore, Elsa followed a simple plan. If she couldn't catch up with the fleeing earth dragon, then she wouldn't allow it to escape. Elsa, she held the blade aloft and threw it like a discus, swiftly sending it spinning at the fleeing ground dragon, cutting its thick neck in two from behind. Splattering scarlet blood onto the snow, the earth dragon failed to notice its own death as its head fell off. Immediately, the large frame of the earth dragon toppled over and the dragon carriage shook violently as it came to a halt. Elsa, objective accomplished. As for what's inside? Elsa walked up to the halted carriage, but just before she attempted to open the door, she was forced to jump back as a slash from inside broke open the door of the carriage. Elsa, slowly stepping out from within the dragon carriage, there stood a robust man in his prime with close-cropped grey hair. Despite an old, vertical scar that broke into his left eye, his face, adorned simply with a suitable white moustache, remained austere and refined. Regardless, Elsa's didn't use outward appearance as a standard when evaluating men. Rather than on the outside, what was truly precious was within the body. Elsa, in that respect, I think you're very much to my tastes, swordsman. It's an honor for a man to be told so by a beautiful maiden. Elsa blushed, receiving a low sigh as a response from the matured man. With his emerald eyes, the man gave the deceased earth dragon a sidelong glance, and placed his hand upon his silvery breastplate, praying for his steed's soul to find peace. Narrowing her eyes at the elegant gesture, Elsa licked her lips. Elsa, that prayer, and armor engraved with the mark of the Holy Church. An acolyte knight, I presume, swordsman, a former acolyte knight. I've already forsaken my devotion to the Holy Church. At present, I am only a simple swordsman. While he spoke, the man relaxedly placed his hands around his waist. Each side of the man's waist bore one slim sword. He grasped the hilts of both of his blades and stood ready without withdrawing them from their sheaths. At first glance, it was quite a strange stance, but there was no doubt it was how the man fought. Elsa, acolyte knight. An acolyte knight. How wonderful, swordsman, formally. Don't make me repeat myself. Elsa, perhaps you quit, but you're an acolyte knight regardless. Hey, you received the blessing, right, swordsman? Do you think I would tell you? Elsa, I was just asking. I'll let your flesh and blood answer the rest of my questions. The sickly sweet, blood-red grin on her face indicated the battle's start. Elsa's silhouette darted through the blizzard and over the snow, kicking the snow aside as she moved. Her footwork so brisk the snowfall underfoot remained uncrushed. Elsa sprung at the man with her bizarre yet stunning stride. Elsa, wielding her blade, she scraped at the man's neck, lightly scratching his windpipe with the tip of the knife. His human throat would transform into a musical instrument, the blade producing the lovely, desperate sound of one's last moments. Both the sound of the escaping air, and the warped, anguished expression of the acolyte knight should have been entertaining. The acolyte knight remained unmoving. Elsa was still near, and her strike had already been delivered. However, his deep green eyes stayed motionless, as if they were the surface of a rippleless lake. Elsa, in a flash, two blades streaked towards Elsa, grazing her forehead as she twisted her body. The scarlet and azure blades belonged to the katanas carried on the man's waist. Katanas were single-edged swords that originated in the western region of Kararagai, and were valuable weapons of war known for their dreadful sharpness. However, what surprised Elsa was not the existence of the katanas, but the clear skillfulness in the strikes. The katanas were certainly inside their sheaths. Elsa, when did you pull those out? You startled me, swordsman. I'm also surprised. I didn't think you could avoid it. The man clicked his tongue as his first attack was evaded, his strike missing the mark. Elsa, licking the blood dripping down from her slashed temple, somersaulted backwards to regain her balance. Elsa, acolyte knights were quite fearsome. Or rather, perhaps, former acolyte knights were fearsome. The sword's wind blew violently, and what Elsa saw over, and over, and over, in the snow, was death. The scarlet and azure flashes of the blade were intertwined, and what was created around the man was a realm of death that would cut down anyone who touched it. The range of his swords were long, more than twice the length of Elsa's knife. Unable to approach him carelessly, Elsa rapidly flew around the man, utilizing her combat instincts to search for a way to win. Elsa, pull out, put in, pull out, put in, pull out, put in. She concentrated on watching the speed of the sword strikes, in awe, enchanted with the man's skill with the sword. Although she didn't know why, the man maneuvered his swords back to their scabbards after each strike and slashed as he drew them out again. The left and right sides flowed together in a sequence, and the execution of the sword extraction and insertion was remarkably fast. The two strikes could be fired simultaneously or separately, and she couldn't find any gaps in his movements. Elsa, if I take my time, I'll have the advantage. In the background, at the original target, at that building, the Crimson Hunting Squad and the Orcos domain garrison were still fighting. Judging from their skill, Logris and the others would be able to overpower them eventually. In that case, reinforcements would rush to this battle, and Elsa would gain the advantage, but that would be a supremely boring ending. Elsa, before that, I should stay true to the nature of the Bowel Hunter, swordsman, reckless. Elsa, determined to avoid a final scene that fell flat, forcibly plunged right into the sword flash. The man, however, raised his voice at her for her decisive yet barbaric action. In the man's eyes, Elsa's charge was an rash suicide attack lacking the means to succeed. In truth, there was no clear-cut solution to this struggle in Elsa's mind. What there was, though, was a sense of ecstasy that boiled her blood in excitement. Swordsman, a blow, with a high-pitched sound that echoed throughout the snowfield. The impact ripped the knife from Elsa's hand. However, she succeeded in blocking the magnificent scarlet slash the man had unleashed. Rushing forward with a single bound, he closed much of the distance, then. The azure sword strike, swordsman, here we go, a second blow. Elsa, she undid the bottom hem of her evening dress and flipped the second knife strapped to her pale thigh into her hand. Slashing at the azure blade from directly underneath, her knife scattered sparks and released a scraping sound as it flicked off the blade. In exchange for blocking the man's two blows, Elsa also had lost her two weapons. She took 2 steps forward to close in, his breath becoming visible. Elsa, in the next moment, the man's swords launched forward, scarlet and azure blades fired at the empty-handed Elsa, blood splattered, and the sword strike split her flesh open deep. The impact pierced through her bones, a sharp sound like hitting a frozen rock throbbed around them, and finally, someone let out an exhale. It was a sigh of disappointment, despite the man's lips quivering as he gazed in wonder at the figure before him. Swordsman, you're an idiot. Elsa, it hurts, it hurts. I thought I was going to die. Well, that's a sign that I'm still alive. As Elsa spoke and smiled at him, the swordsman was at a loss for words. His reaction was natural. The sword blows that the man fired were no different, both hitting Elsa directly in the flesh. How did Elsa respond to being so heavily outclassed? She simply stood still, with her arms outstretched. Entering through Elsa's palms, the blades passed through her slender wrists, forearms, elbows, and upper arms. They were only stopped by the bones around her shoulders. He was unable to cut completely through due to Elsa's approach, seizing the swords at their hilts. It was an insane decision, to lose so much blood and surely both arms. Yet, Elsa, it's my win, I'll let you meet an angel. Swordsman, what the hell is this? As Elsa ignored the intense pain, the swordsman tried to pull his blades back. However, Elsa leaned forward faster than the man could move. Swordsman, but Elsa's lips parted, and her white teeth sunk into the man's neck, spewing blood as her teeth found their way through the gaps in his armor. Elsa fatally gouged into the man's neck. Bathed in that fresh blood and with crimson splotches covering her face, Elsa spat out the flesh in her mouth. Elsa, I really felt that just now. With that, she let out an exhilarated white breath onto the snowfield, bathing in the relief of, at last, the man's demise. Her arms, struck by the swords, were unable to be moved, and Elsa kept walking over the snow, blood continuing to drip down. Leaving a trail of blood on the snow behind her, she peered into the dragon carriage that the older man had been trying to protect. Inside the cut door, shivering in the cold wind at the back of the dragon carriage was Igor's subordinate. This seems to be quite the spectacular scene. At the voice from behind her, Elsa slowly turned around. The person approaching her, Standing by the dragon carriage was a young man in warm clothes with a thin smile on his face. Igor's protégé. Elsa's dark eyes narrowed at the young man who had appeared alone on the front lines without an escort. Elsa, you're not to move from the command base. That's what I thought, at least. Igor's subordinate, I was planning to do that. But if Victor Orcos moves, that's a different story. I've been deployed here for that purpose. Although, cutting his words off, the young man smiled scornfully at the corpse of the robust man lying on the snow. Igor's subordinate, I guess I didn't even have a role to play. Bowl Hunter, you're even better than they say. Elsa, I'm not sure I can honestly accept your praise in my current situation. Why do you need to come out when Victor Orcos moves, I wonder? Igor's subordinate, why do you think that is? Maintaining a smile on his face, the young man kept a distance of about 10 meters from Elsa. Oddly enough, the snowfall had temporarily ceased, and there was nothing between them to obstruct their eyesight or voices. Her arms were unmovable, and her weapons were not at hand. Her heart was beating awfully noisily in her chest. Elsa, the prone man. According to the young man's words, he was Victor Orcos himself. He was the source of this incident, and a traitor who treated his people like slaves. Although, if that was the case, Elsa, it's very odd that the children in the dragon carriage are dressed so warmly. Behind Elsa, inclining her neck in puzzlement, there were no less than 15 children squeezed into the dragon carriage. All of them were around 10 years old, and their clothes were warm furs and other heavy outfits for the cold. Elsa, that's not the kind of clothing slaves are dressed in. Igor's subordinate, what makes you say that? Elsa, personal experience. Tattered rags and beaten wounds, filthy skin, and dirty hair. It's unnatural to have none of that. The young man's face stiffened slightly as Elsa dug up a memory and answered plainly. With a fake smile, the annoyed subordinate scratched his head and spoke. Igor's subordinate, you're Igor Summer's favorite, so I don't want to harm you. Elsa, don't worry. I have no interest in Baron Summer. He's too fat. Igor's subordinate, I see, then, I won't hesitate. In response to Elsa's reply, the young man unfolded his palm at her. From that palm, a dazzling, shining white light shot out, that is, a hidden life form of light with supernatural power. Elsa, an acolyte knight contracted with a spirit. Immediately following Elsa's mention of the young man's identity, several rays of destructive power unleashed from that white light. Then the light swallowed the motionless Elsa, and yet still it continued on, the bright blast bathing the snowfield in white.
Re-Zero, Side Story, Red Snowfall on Orcos Territory, Part 2.
Upon awakening, Elsa observed her surroundings with her usual state of mind. Whether she woke up in a tranquil bed, in the midst of an enemy encampment, or even from a nap in a disastrous scene of blood and guts, that never changed. It was a habit that had been deeply ingrained into her body, ever since she had taken that devil's hand over 10 years ago, that had been so. Elsa, where am I? ? Looks like you noticed. It was a modest room made out of stone, one she had no recollection of. As she looked around the room inquisitively, a voice called to her from the side. Shifting her attention to that direction, she was a little surprised. She had already sensed the presence, but its identity was the cause for her shock. Sat cross-legged on the floor, with their brawny arms crossed and eyes closed, was a grey-haired swordsman, and, Elsa, I'm sure I had bitten off your throat, though, ? So that's the first thing you check after waking up? What an utterly horrid woman you are. Elsa, apologies. It's in my nature. So, would it be correct to assume that you are Victor Orcos? Victor, indeed. As Elsa posed a question with her head tilted in doubt, the swordsman, the one who Elsa faced off against, and ought to have died a noble death, Victor Orcos deeply nodded his head in response. Victor was draped in light white clothing, having removed the holy armor of an acolyte knight. The scar that ought to have been left on his exposed neck was nowhere to be found. The fatal wound that had been thrust into him by Elsa's fangs was nowhere to be found. Elsa, the power of your blessing, correct. Victor, blessings and the like, are not as pure as the impression one would get from that word. The gospels used by the witch cult are of a similar nature, albeit to a different degree. Elsa, even though you're an acolyte knight, you do not have faith. Well, it doesn't really matter. With a response as indifferent as she had stated, Elsa loosened her vigilance towards Victor. For the time being, it seemed that there was no need to worry about the situation suddenly developing into a fight to the death, that could also be extrapolated from her current appearance. After all, Elsa, why did you go to the trouble of letting me live when we ought to have fought to the death? You even went as far as to treat my wounds. Licking her lips, Elsa raised up both of her arms. They were wrapped in white bandages from her elbows to the fingertips, and she could also sense that healing magic had been applied, but it was the bout against Victor that had caused these injuries in the first place. Having fought to the death, she had certainly taken his life once. It was difficult to imagine that he would have given medical treatment to Elsa, and, at the moment when Victor gave a complex frown to Elsa's question, Oni-san is awake. Victor Summer, you lied to me again, as the door of the room was opened. A high-pitched voice pierced the interior. When Elsa looked over to see what was going on, she saw a red-haired girl pointing at the bed from the entrance. She was a girl in her mid-teens with freckles and a sense of youthfulness on her face. As she glanced at Victor, red-haired girl, even though I politely asked you to call for me as soon as she woke up. Victor Summer, you are always like this. Victor, Nora, you're speaking too loud. Sorry for the delay in notifying you, but she just woke up. In other words, the promise was just about to be fulfilled. You were overeager with your denunciation. Nora, you can't fool me by saying complicated words. If you feel bad, then reflect on it. Go on. Victor, I'm sorry. As Victor lowered his head, the girl called Nora exhaled in satisfaction. Seeing that, Elsa wore a rare expression of slight surprise. The warrior's presence gave a fierce indication that as a former acolyte knight, Victor's strength was incomparable to that of an ordinary person. There was an indescribable pathos in the sight of such a person being rebuked by a single girl. At the same time, Elsa noticed that she had a recollection of seeing Nora. Elsa, you were the girl from that dragon carriage. I remember you. After all, you were in the front trying to protect the other children, Nora. Nora's cheeks stiffened when Elsa identified her. Still, she stoutly refused to avert her eyes from Elsa. That was admirable. The dragon carriage in question that had been the cause of the battle between Elsa and Victor, so she must have witnessed their fight. Of course, she also would have seen Elsa bite out Victor's throat. And even though that ought to have been the case, Elsa, and yet, you went as far as to treat my wounds. These bandages were also applied by you, correct, Nora? How? Elsa, a faint hint of your scent remains on these bandages. I have a good sense of smell. Elsa lightly snorted her nose, and Nora could not help but be at a loss for words. That reaction convinced Elsa that her guess was correct. In addition, it was likely the girl who had suggested that Elsa be treated and protected. Victor was coerced to comply, that seemed to be the rough gist of things. The question was, why had such a thing occurred? Elsa, so, can I ask you what exactly happened? Victor, I was also dead for a period of time. Hence, I can only talk about what happened after I revived. Elsa, yes. I don't mind. I also remember being attacked by a new acolyte knight, right after she bit off Victor's throat when she was assailed by the young man who was Igor's retainer and had rushed to the scene. Her memories came to a halt. While being an acolyte knight with phenomenal powers, the young man had cunningly concealed his abilities. With both her arms wounded, she should have suffered an utterly one-sided defeat by that young man. Victor, I was able to revive in time before my core shattered. Thanks to that, I was able to fight off the acolyte knight. Then, I pulled the dragon carriage in place of the dead earth dragon and retreated. Elsa, pulling a dragon carriage in place of an earth dragon. Oh, I kind of wish I could have seen that. Victor, Elsa, Is something wrong? Elsa tilted her head at Victor when he balked at her honest opinion. However, ignoring that question of Elsa's, Victor, after that, I brought you back, gave you medical treatment, and monitored you until you awakened. That is all. Elsa, I see. Even so, you seem to have a very different personality from what I've heard. According to her employer, Baron Igor Kenash, Victor Orcos was a despicable individual who betrayed the Holy Kingdom and preyed on the population of his domain for human trafficking purposes. However, there was not even the slightest hint of a small man's vulgarity in the actual Victor. Their standoff was also a fair and honest one. Of course, such vulgarity did not always align with one's human nature, but, Victor, and, what exactly have you heard, Elsa, that you are a slave trader who sells the subjects of your domain to other countries as slaves? A traitor who, the moment news of his business leaked out, secluded himself to his domain in order to hold down the fort while persisting in a rebellion that had no chance for victory, or something like that. Victor, I see. I guess it'd be something around that. Nora, that's not even close. For what kind of reason would they be calling Victor Summer like that? Victor and Nora each took a different extreme in their response to Elsa, who conveyed the facts without paying an ounce of consideration. Victor scornfully smirked with a sense of resignation and Nora's face was red with indignation. Elsa nodded her head with an indeed in agreement with Nora's anger. Elsa, the slave trade is just another business. It does a wonderful job of providing value to those who have none, and selling them. To disparagingly show contempt for that act is quite a cruel thing to do. Nora, that's not what I was mad about. Elsa, Nora, what I'm angry about is the lie that Victor Summer is enslaving everyone in town. With a heart filled with rage, Nora drew closer to Elsa with that momentum. Her advance was stopped by Victor, who extended his arm, but her words reached Elsa firmly, and so did the fact that the contents of those words differed to the circumstances Elsa was aware of. Victor, I don't expect you to believe me, but what you have been told was falsified information. There is not a single shameful deed being carried out in the Orcos domain. Everything was Igor's schemes, false accusations. Elsa, Victor, the slave trade in question, its ringleader is none other than Igor himself. Proceeding with my investigation to try and prosecute that, I was fine with transporting those girls as slaves until I could secure them, but, giving a sidelong glance to the girl beside him, Victor cast his eyes down in lament. When she looked at Nora, who watched over Victor anxiously, Elsa could imagine the unspoken tale that lay beyond those words, and the words he spoke were likely true. The merchandise present within the dragon carriage were wearing decent clothing, and Igor's retainer had turned on Elsa the moment she pointed that out. Elsa, in essence, you're trying to say I was set up. Victor, precisely. Igor's crafty scheme was thorough, wasn't it? That guy's good at currying favor with those in power. My explanations will no longer reach anyone in the Holy Church. I thought I knew all there was to know about the corruption in this country, but I was naive. Right now, I just feel deeply sorry to all the citizens who got caught up in it. The brunt of his feelings of helplessness was not for his own future, but for his sense of responsibility regarding the population of his domain. The imagination she had wrung out was correct. Victor had been treated as a rebel on such a large scale. At this point, it was difficult to believe that the Holy Kingdom would abandon this course of action. Elsa, so then? Just what might be your objective in telling me such a story? Victor, Elsa, to be honest, I'm not really interested in whether what you just told me is true or not. I'm not saying that it doesn't matter, but the truth is painted over in the face of the outcome. Just like how Earth is covered by snow. That's how it is in this country, isn't it? Neither you nor I can escape that rule. Victor, that's quite harsh. Nevertheless, it's correct. Rather than cold-hearted, it was more appropriate to call Elsa's answer indifferent, even while being informed on the situation. In response, Victor sarcastically contorted the corner of his mouth and tapped Nora on the shoulder beside him. Victor, I desire nothing from you. I'll just say this, don't go on a rampage. Moreover, it was on Nora's request that you were saved. I was going to leave you in the snow. Elsa, I see. In that case, why did you? With Victor's hand still on her shoulder, Nora faced Elsa. Nora's grey eyes and Elsa's black eyes were reflected in the others. Then, as the girl cleared her throat, Nora, because I just didn't want you to die. Is that not good enough? Elsa, Nora, the Holy Church, the Holy King, and the Benevolent Mother teach us to treat all forms of life with compassion. I, too, was saved by Victor Summer right before I was really about to die. That's why, Elsa, but that Gustican holy church is now trying to destroy the Orcos' domain. Yet you still do so, Nora. I was saved by the teachings. I will never forget that, even if the teachings turn their back on me. Elsa's eyes narrowed at Nora as she declared that so resolutely. The girl's eyes were filled with tears, which even now were on the verge of streaming down her stiffened cheeks. Still, she did not avert her eyes, she did not hang her head, and she spoke her mind. That was an extremely sweet stimulation that made Elsa's heart throb. Elsa, I'm sure, your insides must be very beautiful. Nora, huh? Victor, don't make too many imprudent remarks. If I see you as a danger, I'll chop your head off immediately. With a lustrous smile, Victor gave a warning to Elsa's methods of giving high praise. He sheltered Nora behind him, who wore a look on her face that suggested she did not understand, and he had his hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist. To that excessive caution, Elsa showed off her bandage-covered arms, and, Elsa, I was joking. Look at this. I'm unable to do anything very dangerous, Nora. Victor Summer. You're talking to a wounded person. Victor, fine. With Elsa and Nora having rebuked him, Victor had no choice but to put away his hostilities. Victor, it's Nora's request. We'll treat you as our guest for a while, but once you're able to move, you have to leave here as soon as possible. Eventually, Igor's forces will close in. Elsa, oh yes. I may have failed to die, but they already consider me to be an enemy. Was her survival a miracle of the benevolent mother, or was it perhaps on the whims of the devil? Either way, Victor's opinion that she should not stay here too long was valid. Elsa, then I'll stay without reservation. I'll be in your care until I can move. Victor, rest up well during your stay. We're scarce, but if there's anything you need, you can ask Nora. Elsa, is that so? Well, in that case, I have a favor to ask her right away. When Elsa bit at the generous offer, Victor and Nora both widened their eyes. Elsa gave a slight smile to the two. Elsa, a crochet hook and some yarn, could I have some? It's a hobby I use to pass the time. As the two of them were told that, they were quite surprised. Nora, Oni-san, I don't know what to make of you. With a dismayed sigh, Nora was lying down on her bed as she gave such an evaluation of Elsa. Elsa herself tilted her head at the girl's comment with a confused look on her face. Elsa, is that so? Though I am merely spending my time in my own way, just as I would have thought myself to do. Nora, in your own way. How exactly? Elsa, following my intuition, I guess. It's my nature to follow my instincts when it comes to thinking about things after all. Nora, and the result of those instincts, is knitting to pass the time when you're badly hurt? Even going as far as to borrow the hands of another? With bitter feelings harbored in her youthful face, Nora concentrated on the task at hand. In the girl's small hands were a crochet hook and a skein of yarn, and she knitted with restless, paw movements, and all of this was in place of Elsa, who had injured both her arms. Elsa, you're quite good at this. It's worth my while to teach you, Nora. Not that I'm not happy to receive compliments, but even if my knitting improves now, Elsa, the things you learn will not be in vain. All the more if you don't become a slave. Having extolled Nora with praise, Elsa was in good enough of a mood to let the girl continue her knitting. But Nora's hand stopped at those words, and Elsa let out a what? With raised eyebrows, Nora, Oni-san, have you ever been a slave? Elsa, was there the brand of slavery on my body, I wonder? Nora, there weren't any, but, responding to Nora's question in a roundabout way, Elsa chuckled. Then there's your answer. Generally, though this was common knowledge in the slave trade, it was common practice for slaves to be branded on their backs. It was a ritual to show ownership and to painfully remind the slave themselves that their body was no longer their own. A slave did not need a sense of self. They would be stripped of that right at the beginning. Branding was a rite of passage in that regard, Elsa, but slavery is a slave's only way of life. I have no intention to deny that. As long as you give up your own way of living, you will at least remain tied to life. And in this country, that's a luxury. Nora, Oni-san, you think it wouldn't be so bad to become a slave? Elsa, I don't want to be one. That's why I ran away. There, turn that over. Nora widened her eyes at the assertion that seems to overturn her previous view. Not caring about the reaction, Elsa nonchalantly gave the next instruction and turned her attention out of the room. In response to the earlier conversation, Nora was absorbed in knitting and thinking. She had not noticed, but there have been frequent signs of people coming and going in front of the room since a few minutes ago. Elsa, with every nerve in her body on edge, Elsa focused her attention on those signs of people coming and going. The sound of footsteps and breathing could be heard. Multiple signs caused her skin to tingle with wariness. The echoes of footsteps and the number of people milling about gave her an idea of the approximate size of the building. It was a big building in its own right. Although not quite as grand as Igor's mansion, the architectural style of the atmosphere was quite close. Perhaps it was Victor's mansion. If he opened up his mansion to the fiefdom and used it as a base of operations, it made sense given his character. The robustness of the building could not be compared to that of an ordinary house. Though it would be all the same if they were forced into a corner. Elsa, but, you seem to be cherished by everyone. Nora, Elsa's whispered tone of voice made Nora, who was concentrating on the task at hand, look at her curiously. Nora could never understand the signs of coming and going outside the room. They were Victor's men, who were worried about Nora, who had been left in the room with Elsa. Given Elsa's position and title, their concern was justified. On the other hand, Nora's presence was also a deterrent to their response to Elsa. One would think that Elsa, held as a prisoner of war in enemy territory, would be an outlet for their anger. The fact that this had not been the case was largely due to Nora's presence beside Elsa. As a result, Nora contributed to her surroundings in a way that did not create unnecessary conflict. Elsa didn't know the extent to which Victor had intended for that to happen. Nora, here, and then like this. I did it, I think. Elsa, let me see. The doll that had been presented to her without much confidence had followed Elsa's instructions carefully, so it was quite well made. If this was her debut work, it went far above the grade needed to pass. Nora was suited to knitting. Elsa, a wonderful job. Your fingers are quite dexterous, so you can do more than just be a slave. Nora, Oni-san, you're not very good at complimenting people. Elsa, is that so? I guess so. I get told that quite often. With the doll placed in her bandaged, crippled hand, Elsa responded without much of a care. Nora sighed deeply in response and continued, but, Nora, I'm glad to hear you say I'm good with my hands. I don't want to be a slave either. Elsa, I see. The more one could do, the more paths opened up for them to live by other than being a slave. Having understood Elsa's words of wisdom, Nora digested them as she spoke. Elsa responded indifferently to the answer, yet pulled the doll to her chest. As a matter of fact, no matter how much Nora thought about the future, there was no future for the Orcos domain. The Gustican Church was using Igor, working with the intention of formally covering up any scandal. That was why? Elsa, if you have something you want to say, you might as well say it. Nora, HK. Elsa, I'm not very good at understanding people's feelings. So if you don't tell me, I won't know. And I owe you a debt of gratitude for saving me. Lending and borrowing is the principle of settling debts. Nora, who had been looking at Elsa holding the doll with mystified eyes, choked up. It was a casual remark, but Elsa did not tell unnecessary lies. Her words came from the heart, the act of lending and borrowing to clear debts. As the bull hunter, it was one of Elsa's few beliefs. Elsa, naturally, there is a limit to what I can do. Nora, as if in thought, Nora turned over and fell silent. Elsa quietly waited for the girl to speak as the blood drained from her face and her exhalations quickened. Frankly, if nothing else, that was fine. She'd like to settle the debt, but if the other party didn't want to, that would be their decision. She would respect that. Though Elsa felt a little bad about it. Nora's save. Elsa, therefore, Elsa, who was prepared for nothing to be proposed, was only momentarily slow to react. She looked up to see Nora, fists clenched in her lap, staring at Elsa as if she were gritting her teeth. The girl then repeated the words of her wish in a trembling voice. Nora, please, save me. Victor Summer, and everyone else, they say we have no choice but to fight. But even if we fight, they had no chance of winning. Nora also understood the tragic resolution that the adults had set in place. With that understanding, perhaps the girl was prepared to do the same. However, if there was any hope to be found, the likes of any young resolve would easily be shattered. At the girl's wish, Elsa looked down at the doll, which was housed in her bountiful bosom. Elsa exhaled a small sigh as she looked into the eyes of the amateurish doll, and, "Elsa, I guess I have to pay back what I owe, right?" Without looking at the teary-eyed girl, she simply muttered that, even at night, which served as a symbol of serenity, the kingdom of Gusteko was disconnected from the concept of stillness. Outside the building, heavy snow blew violently in a storm, and thick, fast clouds overlooked the land endlessly. With both visibility and sound so hectic, it was possible to have the silence submit. Hence, it was easy for Elsa to slip out of the building, even if it had a watchman standing guard. The likes of impaired arms were no problem whatsoever for an agent like herself. Elsa opened the door to her assigned room and majestically slipped through the corridor in which the guard was standing. If she lurked in the gaps between consciousnesses and slipped past the watchful eye at a quick pace, she would not be caught. Without making a sound, even leaving her shadow behind, she easily left the building. As expected, the building standing amidst the snow was the mansion of Victor Orcos, located in the innermost place of the Orcos domain. Bonfires burned in the surroundings of the building, and lights for the guards could be seen here and there in the distance. The scent of excitement and caution that pervaded the surrounding area was probably evidence that Igor's forces had invaded quite deep into the Orcos domain. Just before Elsa deserted the warfront, a joint operation with the Crimson Hunting Squad was in its final stages. Even if Elsa was missing, it would not cause Logros and the rest to change their strategy. If that was the case, it would not be long before this place became a battlefield. "Elsa, since you're the main force, I'm not sure it's a good idea for you to be staying up so late." This body, though abominable, bears the qualifications of a saint. It is needless to worry. Elsa looked back at the house, and Victor, clad in a fighting spirit that could melt the snow, answered her question. He wore a white cloak and had 2 katanas at his waist, ready for battle. Oddly enough, this situation bore a close resemblance to the battlefield where the two had initially met. The problem was Elsa's arms, and her lack of weaponry. Against an acolyte knight on a blizzard night, the situation was suddenly unfavorable. Elsa, what a thrill! Despite knowing that the situation was against her, Elsa's cheeks flushed with excitement and she exhaled. She was in a state of euphoria, and her thinly clad body was beginning to radiate heat from within. In a world of extreme cold where even one's life would be in danger, the dense smell of death and the woman's lust overflowed, coloring the very essence of life and death. However, when Elsa was unable to control her excitement, Victor spoke. "Victor, don't misunderstand. I have no intention of getting into a fight with you here." "Elsa, is that so?" "Victor, I cannot agree to the reason for your disheartenment, but yes. You're just leaving, right?" Elsa felt disappointed by the peace offer as Victor closed one eye in restraint. At these words, Elsa pulled back her chin and turned her gaze toward Victor's mansion. "Elsa, indeed. I'm indebted to you, and I didn't kill anyone. So now you're going to let me do as I please." "Victor, I don't think you would do this, but I have no intention of letting you rejoin Igor's forces. If that's what you intend to do, I would need to stop just that." "Elsa, before I answer your question, could you tell me what the results would be depending on my choice?" "Victor, I would like to take Nora's wishes into consideration to the maximum extent possible. Nora tried to save you. If possible, I don't want to have to bury that corpse of yours under the snow." Because of the girl's wish, Victor gave his sharpened fighting spirit a slight reprieve. Once someone was buried in snow, they would never be found unless that snow melted. And in Gusteko, there was no such thing as snow that melted naturally. Hence, that sleep would be eternal. Burying someone in the snow was the most ruthless burial in the Holy Kingdom of Gusteko. Elsa, confronted with such a choice, Elsa silently pondered. In this situation, Victor's attitude was seemingly lenient. The options he presented implicitly showed Elsa a way to survive. If he was truly concerned for the good of his domain and was willing to suppress any anxiety, he should cut down Elsa without hesitation. However, if that were to be mentioned, then the very act of taking Elsa into his dragon carriage was strange in the first place. And if therein lay an aim of Victor's outside of lenience, then, Elsa, I'll kindly do as I please. That will not change. Exhaling a white breath, Elsa left the final conclusion of her pondering to intuition. Victor, who had been touching the hilt of his katana, paused for a moment in silent contemplation as Elsa's answer was given. But eventually, he slowly released his hand from the sword and straightened his half-slung posture. Victor, go now. Elsa, if we get the chance, let's fight to the death once more, shall we? To that farewell, Victor exhaled, and Elsa walked away with a smile on her face. With Victor's gaze on her back, Elsa waved her bandaged hand. While holding the doll Nora had made in that hand, Elsa disappeared in the falling snow. Victor, will she amount to being a stray arrow? No, this will just be a vain struggle in the end, won't it? As she disappeared, Victor Orcos muttered one last time without being heard. Igor, oh. Elsa, you've returned. In the warm hall, Elsa received a warm welcome from an obese man, Igor Kenash. He was Elsa's employer, and the leader of the purification operation of the Orcos domain, stroked his ample belly and smiled fondly at her upon her return. The smirk on his face twisted into a quizzical look when he noticed the bandages on Elsa's arms. Igor, what happened to your arms? Your beautiful fingers are ruined. Elsa, there was a battle. When trying to take the lives of others, it is inevitable that injuries will be sustained. Igor, if so, is that why you returned wounded? Makarista, damn useless bastard. Biting his nails in frustration, Igor revealed his discontent with the ineptitude of his retainer, the acolyte knight called Makarista, rather than Elsa, who had returned. Apparently, the clash between Elsa and Makarista had not been communicated to him. It was possible that there was a lapse in communication. Alternatively, there was a chance that Makarista had been killed by Victor. If that was the case, Elsa was a little disappointed. She had yet to see the bowls of a spirit user. Elsa, well, that's fine. Who are those two? Putting aside her disappointment, Elsa pointed behind Igor to the two young individuals standing there. They were young men, around 20 years old, like two peas in a pod. Were they perhaps twins? At least, they were not faces she had seen in the mansion before the purification operation, and they stuck to Igor tightly. With a powerful ambience, they bore shining holy armor that had been engraved with the holy seal. Without a doubt, they must have been members of the Acolyte Knights. Elsa, while I was away, you've acquired new guards. I presume, Igor, they were dispatched from the higher-ups. These right here are proof that my role is considered important by the Church. If anything happens to me, the attack on the Orcos domain will fall apart. The only way for Victor Orcos to break out of this situation is to target that, no matter how desperate it would be. Even a fool could make such predictions, Elsa, and for that purpose you have been granted Acolyte Knights. Quite the lavish hospitality. At Elsa's words, which could be taken either as admiration or sarcasm, the faces of the young Acolyte Knights stiffened. But Igor raised his hand to them and shook his head. No, Igor, don't stimulate them too much, Elsa. For these Acolyte Knights, onto whom celibacy is imposed, your allure is too strong a poison. We cannot allow the sweet scent of debauchery to cause them to make a mistake. Elsa, your phrasing is a tad abstruse. I'm not very good at understanding such things. Igor, that shall do fine. If a woman is beautiful, it is best for her to not be wise. A wise woman goes further than necessary. A woman does not need to do such speculation. If she can just be loved as a wallflower, that's all that matters. It was quite irrational, but Elsa did not feel particularly strongly about his words. They to whom only bad ideas come might as well be asleep. Dim-wittedness was a waste of time to bother with, Elsa agreed on that. Therefore, Elsa followed her instincts. And as a result of following them, Igor, in any case, you have done well to return, Elsa. I am overjoyed for your return. Worry not about your wounded arms. It's more important that you don't have any on that face and body of yours. Elsa, is that so? Why is that, Igor? After all, you will no longer need those limbs of yours." With a vile smile, Igor spoke gruesomely. Elsa frowned at his significant comment. Even faster than that, the two acolyte knights behind him sprung into action. Elsa. A moment later, Elsa's vision was broken diagonally by a flash of tremendous sharpness that cleaved the wind. The only reason it barely missed was because she had anticipated a surprise attack. A blow quicker than the speed of sound, if unanticipated, would be nearly impossible to avoid. The two knights still continued with their method of attack, the sound of slicing wind circling overhead. Elsa, twin whips. Truly, it's one interesting fighting style after the other with you acolyte knights, isn't it? Victor used katanas, Makarista used a spirit, and the two in front of her used a dual-wielding style. With whips the twin knights freely wielded twin whips, in other words, 4 lines at the speed of sound, raged and dominated the room. Elsa, though I thought there had been no report of the breakdown between your retainer and I, as Elsa moistened her lips with fighting spirit and posed a question, Igor smiled as he took a wide step back and detached himself from the battlefield. Igor, That's the first I've heard of that. I merely punish those whom I'm suspicious of. I was just going to eliminate all elements that were not in the prior plan. In your case, I was planning to cut off your arms and legs and make you my beloved concubine once matters were settled. Till then I kept up my act. Elsa, is that so? Now, for the first time, I have grown fond of you. Quite a nice hobby you have. When Igor revealed his cruel nature to her, Elsa responded with a beaming smile. Igor's nose puffed out in excitement at the beauty which could send shivers down one's spine. Igor, then, will you be my favorite mistress by offering your arms and legs to me? It won't hurt, Elsa. It's hard to decline that offer, but I'm sorry. I put my hobbies first. She didn't mind pain. It was true there was an exciting aspect to Igor's proposal. But more than that, Elsa prioritized her own pleasure. That was to say, Elsa, I'm going to give love to the insides of your bellies. Immediately following that declaration of the Bowel Hunter's desires, the twin whips of the acolyte knights engulfed the great hall. Marble walls and expensive carpets were mercilessly destroyed as dust filled the space. The tip of the whips manipulated by knights had countless fine thorns, which made for a brutal contraption that ripped the flesh of its prey from its bones. Even a mere graze would leave one with a serious injury. In a battlefield where they closed in like snakes moving at the speed of sound, Elsa, her arms dangling, swept through them with a gliding, dancing gait. The concept of floors, walls, and ceilings became meaningless in Elsa's gait through space. Up and down, left and right, Elsa leapt around the hall, tracing the gaps of the whip attacks. Igor, what the hell are you doing, you acolyte knights? The blessing granted to you by His Eminence is weeping. With the expectation that it would be an instant victory betrayed, Igor's spittle flew as he rebuked the acolyte knights. The expressions of the twins remained unchanged at those words, however the speed and sharpness of each of the twin whips increased all the more. Faster than sound, faster than wind, the whiplashes accelerated. However, Elsa, very good. But, it's not enough. As the whips grazed her toes and glided across her black braid, Elsa smiled in ecstasy. The coordination of the twin acolyte knights was superb. Their dual-wielded whips compensated for each other's blind spots and never allowed the enemy to breach their high-speed attack range. Once the whip caught the enemy, a barrage of lashes would rush toward the stationary opponent, uprooting them. If it landed, it was a tactic that guaranteed certain victory, hence, it was lacking in minute maneuvers. Elsa, for example, what if I do this? Elsa leapt directly above the hall as whip shots exploded beneath her feet. The twins followed the shadow and chose to pursue it with their whips, but that was an error in judgment. Directly above the great hall, Elsa's kick shattered an enormous crystal chandelier, and the massive mass fell to the ground in one fell swoop. Even a lash that was effective against the human body would not be powerful enough against such a large inorganic object. Acolyte Knights, HK. Jumping quickly to the left and right, the twin acolyte knights avoided being crushed by the crystal chandelier. A thick plume of smoke rose, and the whips of the counterattack cracked loudly as they aimed at the shadow standing in the middle of the plume. Elsa, yes, got you. Elsa grabbed the whip strikes that came at her from each side with her raised left and right arms. Sharp thorns dug into her hands through the bandage, but Elsa didn't let the pain bother her. Then, faster than the gasping acolyte knights, she turned the tip of the whip in her hands to the fittings of the fallen crystal chandelier. Elsa, will your judgment continue to overlap now that you two are separated? Tying the whip to the damaged crystal chandelier, Elsa kicked it vigorously away. The super-heavy illumination spun and blew away, and the acolyte knight connected by the whip was swept up by its momentum. Of course, if he let go of the whip, he would be freed from this violent storm. But even if they were twins, their thoughts are not linked. Due to the unforeseen circumstances, a momentary separation in their time was yielded. Elsa, how was that? Do you feel it? Sliding over to the twin whose judgment had lapsed, Elsa grabbed him by the face as she posed a question. The other person's throat tightened at her smile, and eyes darkened with fear. Immediately after, Elsa switched her position with the person she had grabbed and used him as a shield against whiplashes from behind her. Having wounded his other half with sharp thorns, the unscathed twin's throat clogged up. He must not cease his movements there. He had failed. Upon that discomposed face, Elsa cracked a whip that had fallen. Acolyte Knight, HK. Elsa, since you get along so well with your brother, I'll give you the same wound. You can share in each other's pain. With their faces gouged by whiplashes, Elsa pulled them both back with her whip in one fell swoop. Unable to resist her power, the twin acolyte knights collided head-on and collapsed to their knees in an embrace. Lined up torsos, overlapping bellies. Elsa removed the bandages from both arms and pulled out a kukri. Elsa, you were born with a blessing, weren't you? I'll give you two a blessing as well. She smiled, stepped forward, and swung her blade with force. With a single flash, the blessed holy armor was slashed in half across the twins' torsos. Divided by the upper and lower halves, the twin acolyte knights collapsed in a sea of fresh blood and guts. Unable to even raise a cry of despair, the acolyte knights die before the madness of the Bowel Hunter. Elsa, in the face of their dead corpses, Elsa folded her knees lightly and checked them carefully. Naturally, it was a fatal wound, no sign of life. Perhaps it was because they were not yet too familiar with their blessing, but they died in a single blow without reviving. But Elsa was more interested in what was inside the twins, who had worked so hard together. Elsa, how lovely, even though they are twins, their insides are still completely different. She compared the color and shape of the scattered entrails with the tip of her kukri. Watching such a crazed Elsa, Igor, whose escorts were killed, opened and closed his mouth as if panting. Igor, acolyte knights, even them. And, your arms were wounded. Elsa, oh, you mean these bandages? Though I was already fully healed from the beginning. I just didn't know when to unwind the bandages after all the trouble that had been taken to have them wrapped. In response to the weeping questioning, Elsa gracefully removed the nearly undone bandages. Underneath, the skin was white without a scratch, not a single scar from Victor's sword or the thorn from the whip lashes she received from the recent battle. Elsa, now then, time to deal with you. Igor, wait. What do you think? What do you think will happen to you if you kill me? Igor, whose face was drenched in greasy sweat, turned his voice inside out as Elsa enjoyed the twins' intestines. Igor, I am now under the command of the Gustican Church. If you kill me, you will become an enemy of the Holy Church. In other words, a great enemy of the Holy Kingdom. Elsa, a great enemy of the Holy Kingdom. At the sound of that, Elsa quietly closed her eyes. Igor gulped heavily at Elsa's response, and he pinned his hopes on the words that followed. And then, Elsa, that sounds very, very lovely. Her black eyes narrowed with a smile, they lit wet with murderous intent, and Igor screamed, "Eep." Then he backed away, and the man rushed off in a great hurry to the back of the hall, fleeing deeper into the mansion. Igor, anyone? Anyone out there? Save me. With a cracked voice calling for help, Igor ran deeper and deeper into the mansion. The office at the far end of the mansion had a hidden passageway to escape outside. If he could escape that far, if he could buy enough time, he wouldn't be caught by this horror. Igor, anyone? Save me. Anyone. Igor ran frantically down the hallway and gasped for breath. There he finally realized the uncanniness of the situation. More than 20 of Igor's mercenaries were waiting in the mansion. The reason why only 2 acolyte knights were brought to the hall was because he thought it would be enough to seize Elsa, and yet, there was no sign of the mercenaries who should be there. He had shouted and not a single one showed themselves. As expected, Elsa is so picky. The voice abruptly shook Igor's eardrums as he leaned against the wall and shrank back in eeriness. It sounded to Igor like the voice of a young maiden. But the strange luster in her voice was not commensurate with her age, and the sound stirred panic. Then he turned to the voice, and this time, Igor's mind reached its limit. Igor, the people in this mansion are all fatties, so I don't like this. If Shadow Lion Chan gets fat, I'll make Elsa take the blame. The voice came from above. But Igor had no time to deal with that voice. Igor's attention was riveted to the presence in front of him, the oral cavity lined with countless sharp fangs, a huge, mighty witch beast with a wide-open mouth. Even as his thoughts stopped, at the last moment Igor understood. Slimy red wet fangs. He knew that this was the answer to why the mercenaries had not responded. Good night. That was the last voice Igor Kenash heard after all his debauchery and plotting. After being thrusted by countless blades, Victor Orcos finally stopped moving. Logros of the Crimson Hunting Squad sighed as he looked down on Victor, the target of purification operation, who bled profusely and had lost his right leg, and whose will to fight remained undiminished in the face of death. Logros, this isn't a matter of him just being tough. It's a miracle we survived. Crimson Hunter Squad Member 1, ditto. Crimson Hunter Squad Member 2, I feel like half of me is dead. Crimson Hunter Squad Member 3, my blood won't stop either, though. The surviving members of the troop verbally agreed with Logros, who was deflated with fatigue. Not a single one of them was unharmed. The number of members of the group were reduced by half, and it was truly a fight to the death. Their location was the final stronghold of the Orcos domain, the destroyed mansion of Victor Orcos. The purification operation, as Igor called it, had reached its conclusion, and after having pushed the rebels into their stronghold, Logros and his team magnificently overthrew Victor and ended the battle. Logros, there were some huge casualties though. Shit. It would have been a lot easier with Elsa. 4 days earlier, the Bowel Hunter Elsa had gone missing during the operation. Her absence had thrown a wrench in Logros' plans. Nevertheless, the reduced strength was compensated for by the entry of Makerista, who had revealed himself to be an acolyte knight. Logros, when it comes to an enemy that can kill Elsa, we had to prepare accordingly. That said, we incurred a net loss by setting up a precious magic stone to detonate. I thought we were done for when he endured with just one leg remaining. True to his title of former acolyte knight, Victor was indeed a monster. Half of the Crimson Hunting Squad was cut down by Victor, who was half dead after one of his legs was blown off by an explosive mine. In the end, they were prepared to make sacrifices in order to earn a victory that was won by sheer numbers. Logros, well, a win is a win. I'm not really in the mood for a morning contest, but... Have you got any last words, Victor? So the stray arrow didn't make it in time, huh? Logros, languidly dropping his arms, Victor muttered something regretful on the verge of death. The half-dead man dripped blood from his mouth to Logros, who was about to hear his last words. Victor, to a whimsical stray arrow. I left the future of my domain, Logros. That's a bit too much reliance on others. When you, the lord of the domain, went and did all that, this place was doomed. It was only natural for it to be destroyed. At the interrupted words, Logros clicked his tongue with disdain. Logros himself was aware of what was behind the purification operation. As he told Elsa, the unity of the Orcos domain was disproportionate to the corrupt feudal lords. The Gustican Church's practice of covering up dirty affairs was not uncommon. There was a 90% chance Victor had been set up, but he had no means to reveal it, no way to uncover it, and no opportunity to do so. Because in this country, it is not the rightful truth, but the absurdly powerful that prevailed. Makerista, as that mercenary said, this is a situation created by your incompetence, that it is. Logros, you've come out, Makerista, a high-pitched voice echoed, and a nervous-looking young man appeared in the collapsed hall. Makerista Perkin, Igor's confidant and acting commander of the operation. Half of the slender young man's face was bandaged, and his bare eyeballs were bloodshot with anger. All of that pain and anger was directed at the dying victor. Makerista, I was going to repay you 10,000 times over for this wound, but here you are. You are truly an inferior person that I don't even have to deal with. Logros, who was the one who made a racket because they got their face cut off by that inferior someone. Logros muttered this only in his mouth so that Makerista, who spat out, did not hear. In the meantime, the young man continued to curse at his enemy, but eventually he ran out of words. Makerista, now then, let's shatter your very core, damned sinner. It is nauseating to think that an apostate like you was treated as a saint, even for a moment. You are a disgrace to the Acolyte Knights. Sputtering, Makerista pointed his fingertips at Victor's chest. As it was, an invisible force would destroy Victor's body. It was at that moment, oh dear, it seems I'm a little late. The familiar glamorous voice blocked everyone present from moving. With light footsteps, a lone woman landed in the devastation of the large hall. The woman, dressed in black and sporting a long black braid, gave the men, who stiffened, a terrifying look. Too bad. Seems like we didn't get the chance. Even though I had gone through so many troubles to prepare for this, Logros, I had thought her a woman who wouldn't die even if killed, but this ain't the mood of a happy reunion. Logros felt a sense of foreboding when he reunited with Elsa, a woman who tilted her head and whispered languidly. All the while, Elsa's gaze passed by Logros and Makerista, staring at the dying Victor. At her gaze, Logros also looked back at Elsa. Victor, so the stray arrow has returned, huh, Elsa, No, I am the Bowel Hunter. I came back because I brought something that you wanted. In truth, if you wanted me to pass it over, I would have had us fight over it. At least that was what I was hoping for. With that, Elsa held up a strange package that she was clasped in her right hand. It was a round, black package that was around an armful. Its shape and size gave off an unpleasant premonition. From Elsa's amused side profile, he could imagine it wasn't anything good that had been wrapped up. Elsa, but it looks like both you and your domain are finished. This is a wasted souvenir. Too bad. Makerista, ignoring everyone, that's as far as your carefree talk goes. As Elsa shrugged her shoulders, Makerista interrupted her conversation. The young man clawed at his blood-soaked bandage and stared at Elsa with hatred in his wide-open eyes. Makerista, how dare you show your face in front of me like that? My face. My eyes. Gouged out. If we were to meet again, it'd be a fight to the death, even though you should have understood that, Elsa, Indeed, that's exactly how it is. At Makerista's blood-curdling exclamations, Elsa continued to be as nonchalant as ever. However, the current exchange made Logros understand the feud between them. The scars on Makerista's face were things that had been carved by Elsa. And that was probably why Elsa had gone missing during the mission. Makerista, did you join this man and think you could win? This man's enemy was the Gustecan Church. The Holy Kingdom of Gusteco. His Eminence the Holy King himself. Elsa, you really are making the exact same mistake as your master. At Makerista's bravado, Elsa untied the knot of the package in her hand. Instantly, the black package spread wide and it fell wildly to the ground, bouncing miserably. Having died with eyes and mouth wide open in horror, it was the head of Igor Kenash. Logros, she went and did it. Logros had an idea of what was inside, but when he saw the real thing, he covered his face and looked up to the sky. The members of the Crimson Hunting Squad reacted similarly, but Makerista was the only one who was utterly speechless. The murder of Igor, who had become the general of the operation in accordance with the Holy Church's orders, it was nothing but an act of hostility against the Holy Church, as Makerista loudly claimed. Elsa Granhire had already nonchalantly made enemies of the Holy Kingdom of Gusteco. Makerista, do you understand what you have done? Elsa, I wish you'd stop with all that tedious talk. At that moment, the dense smell of death and the demonic atmosphere overflowed, and transfigured the woman in front of him into the Bowel Hunter. Elsa, I do as I please. It doesn't matter if that enemy is the church or the Holy Kingdom. In my not-so-smart way, I've put a lot of thought into this one. Logros, you put thought into it? This can't be seen as anything other than a thoughtless result though. Elsa, Victor Orcos. The Crimson Hunting Squad. And you, the spirit-using Acolyte Knight. Drawing her kukri, Elsa used its tip to indicate one man after another who was present there. Then she licked her tongue and soaked her black eyes in dark, wet lust. Elsa, I wonder how I'm going to get around to cutting open all of your bellies. Logros, even us. Elsa, yes. I'm sure I'll have a lot of fun dancing with you guys. Elsa responded with a wry smile to Logros's dismay. Logros was unnerved by the smile, which had no remorse whatsoever, and almost seemed childish. But unlike Logros, Makarista seemed to think it was a load of nonsense. Makarista, it's futile talking. Very well. In that case, I will enforce the death penalty as an Acolyte Knight. Elsa, does that mean you're going to serve as my opponent? Makarista, I'll make you forget about being lucky enough to survive, and regret not having escaped. Makarista was enraged, and a pale light appeared around him. The light eventually transformed into a serpent with blue scales, and the spirit manifested itself, exercising power outside of the ordinary. Acolyte Knight Makarista Parkin, the most elite of the elite, sent by the Gustican Church as a key figure in the purification operation at such a young age. He was a brilliant man who would have been expected to hold one of the most prominent positions in the Holy Church in the future, and therefore, he was pitiful to get involved with Elsa Granhire, being targeted by her fetishes, whilst being unaware of her nature, which was more hideous than her strength. He spent the last 2 minutes of his life with the Bowel Hunter. For those 120 seconds of pain, fear, and despair, was the curtain close on his days of faith. Elsa, oh my, if the spirit user dies first, their spirit disappears as well. That was Elsa's simple and succinct impression as she destroyed Makarista's heart, causing him to let out the last shriek of his life. The fallen Makarista had been cut repeatedly all over his body, especially in the abdomen, and he died. The horror of the battle was such that even Logros and his mercenaries, who were battle-hardened, wanted to avert their eyes. Acolyte Knights, bestowed with a blessing, had a resilience and vitality that was unmatched compared to regular mortals. Although there are individual differences, Makarista's vitality was also not comparable to that of an ordinary person, and as a result, he was toyed with. Elsa, next time I fight to the death with a spirit user, I'll have to open the spirit's belly first. Until then, I'll just have to postpone the fun. Logros, I really hate how you say such scary things, though. Logros called out timidly to Elsa, who whipped the blood stain from her kukri. Elsa turned around at the sound of his voice. I guess so, she said, as she pulled her chin back. Elsa, you guys are still here. So, what are you going to do? Logros, there's not anything for us to do. Officially we're supposed to fight you to the death, but we're really not in the mood. The details were unclear, but Elsa had turned on Makarista and Igor. The Crimson Hunting Squad were an adversary, but the people who could order them to do so were collectively dead. Logros, you've thought it through to that extent, and then killed the master. I guess that's not the case though? Probably just took the opportunity to do it. Elsa, oh, my. How did you know? Crimson Hunting Squad Member 1, nah, course we'd know. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 2, as if we wouldn't know. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 3, but now you can't take the opportunity to do so for us. Elsa widened her eyes at the words of mercenaries who understood her behavior. Then, as if understanding that it was not possible to fight in this atmosphere, her overflowing killing spirit disappeared. Regretfully, Logros, and yet, how could you do all this in just 4 days? It's not easy to travel back and forth between Igor's mansion and the Orcos' domain. Elsa, oh, that's easy. I borrowed legs from my sister. Logros, sister? Just as he frowned in question, Logros saw a huge shadow spring up behind Elsa. It truly was a foreign object that had suddenly crept into his purview, as if it had emerged from the shadows. The beastly face, 4 legs, black fur, and terrifying demonic spirit. He knew it was a witch beast at first glance. As he recalled, that type of witch beast was nicknamed Shadow Lion. He couldn't come up with the exact name, though, Victor Summer. But, what was surprising was not the figure of the witch beast. What came as the next surprise was the red-haired girl who rolled off the back of that witch beast. A young girl with abrasions, who lacked the means to fight back, clung to the dying Victor. At the sound of the girl's voice, Victor turned his empty eyes. His life was right on the verge of ending. Girl, Victor Summer. Victor Summer. Don't die. Victor, you, girl, eh? As the girl clutched at him, Victor moved his lips and whispered something to her. Logros could not pick up what he had said. No one could hear it but the girl, and with that breathless whisper as his last, the traitor Victor Orcos died. Logros, Igor is dead, Victor is also dead. Man, just what kinda ending is this? The reunion with Elsa, the appearance of the strange witch beast, and the bereavement of the mysterious girl and Victor. These events happened all at once before Logros' eyes, and he groaned as he held his head in his hands. A strange silence took over the place. But it was the girl who broke the silence. She looked back at Elsa, whose thirsty eyes were opened wide. Girl, why, Elsa, girl, why, didn't you save Victor Summer, and everyone else? Why? It was a terribly unrealistic question. Looking around at the devastation, it was easy to see the irrationality that has struck the Orcos' domain. As a young girl, albeit very young, born and raised in Gusteco, she fully understood the absurdity of the situation. The situation was not something Elsa could have done anything about. But, as Elsa tilted her head curiously at the question, Elsa, when you said that, did you not mean only to save your life, girl, eh? Elsa, to be precise, I thought you had only wanted for yourself to be saved, so I only saved your life. After that, I put my amusement first. I'm sorry. With a light bow and an evil look on her face, Elsa answered the girl's question sincerely. There is not the slightest hint of a lie or hesitation in her voice. Therefore, everyone who heard her could believe her. Those were the true thoughts of Elsa Granhire, without exaggeration. Girl, The next moment, the girl grabbed Victor's broken katana and tried to lunge at Elsa. The girl's screams were filled with murderous intent, and her hatred was focused on Elsa alone. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 1, Little Miss. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 2, there's no use. Crimson Hunting Squad Member 3, she'll slice your belly open and kill you. However, the outburst was stopped by the men of the Crimson Hunting Squad. The strong men held her down, and the girl was unable to resist, yet she continued to raise her voice. Girl, why? Die. I'll get revenge for Victor Summer. For everyone. Elsa, that's quite a terrible thing to say to the person who saved your life. Elsa shrugged her shoulders in frustration as the girl stared at her with bloodshot eyes and a wrathful look on her face. Seeing her, Logros indeed felt sorry for the girl. He did not know the relationship between Elsa and the girl. But the girl had some kind of admiration and expectation of Elsa, and that fleeting hope was incomprehensible to the monster known as Elsa. Logros, Elsa, leave already. It's okay that we're the only ones here, but if Igor's other underlings find out, it's going to be a mess. It'll turn into another fight to the death. Elsa, I wouldn't mind that, though. Logros, we would mind that. We survived, but we don't want to have to fight out allies. Strictly speaking, there was some hesitation to call them allies, but Logros dared to say so. Elsa reluctantly sheathed her kukri. She then turned to Witch Beast behind him and climbed up upon its back. Elsa, oh yeah. About the girl, she doesn't want to be a slave. So take her to a proper town. If you like, you could have her work at your place as well. She's a girl, and her hands are dexterous, so you should have a use for her. Logros, this girl is definitely going to resent you. Elsa, yes, that's lovely. That girl and I will be bound together by hatred. She is going to keep that hatred bottled up in her body for a long, long time, and one day when we meet again. Removing her gaze from Logros, Elsa looked at the girl. The girl was still screaming with hatred as the men seized her. Girl, Elsa, that is very, very lovely. With the countenance of a maiden in love, Elsa spoke thus with an ardent breath. As expected, Elsa is a very stupid girl. The owner of that young voice said this with a great deal of dismay in her voice and demeanor. The voice belonged to the girl in front of Elsa, straddling the back of the witch beast as it ran through the snow, being held against Elsa's chest amidst the sensation of the breeze and tremors. A girl with dark blue hair in a braid rested her head on Elsa, whom just behind her. Girl, in the end, not only did you not get paid for being a mercenary, but now you are even wanted for killing a lot of important people. And on top of that, that girl resents you now, doesn't she? Elsa, oh my, that's terrible. What, it doesn't really bother me. I have no lingering attachment to the Holy Kingdom. And thanks to that, I now have plenty of opponents to fight to the death. Girl, you've made it difficult to operate in Gusteco, Mama will be furious. Elsa smiled thinly and didn't argue with the girl's languidly elongated sentences. Instead, Elsa reached into her pocket and pulled out a woolen doll from it. Elsa, yes, Meili. A new doll. Meili, geez, please don't think I'm going to let this fool me. The girl accepted the offered doll and patted the witch beast's back, her cheeks puffed out in frustration. But the hands that held the doll were gentle, and she doubted if her true feelings were as good as her words. Even that did not bring much emotion to Elsa. Meili, so, yeah, what's next? Since it's become difficult to do stuff in Gusteco, will we move away from the cold? Elsa, I guess so. I yearn for demi-human guts soon. In Gusteco, you don't see them anywhere but in slavery, after all. Meili, there are only a few types of witch beast chans. So then, shall we go Kuraragai next? Elsa, how about Lagunica? Rejecting the option presented to her, Elsa followed her instincts and mentioned the name of that kingdom. The Dragon Kingdom of Lagunica. It was a fertile but somewhat distorted place, protected by the dragon. Meili, is that also just based on a vague feeling? Elsa, yes, it is. Lovely, isn't it? Elsa simply responded to the girl's exhale of exasperation with an amused smile. Forced to leave her birthplace, Elsa Granhire traveled to the Dragon Kingdom. The fateful encounter that awaited her there was the beginning of a lovely destiny for her, but the Bowel Hunter, overflowing with lust at this very moment as she was, had no way of knowing that fact.